Hello and welcome back to Matt's Automotive Channel, or if this is your first time, welcome. Today we'll be doing an oil change on my wife's GT500, and if you don't have a Mustang or GT500, don't worry. Oil changes on most vehicles are pretty darn similar with a few minor differences that I'll explain later. So first of all, we need to ask ourselves a few questions before we start the oil change. Does my car even need an oil change right now? How do I know? And what type of oil do I need? And what type of filter? And what tools are needed to complete the job? So anyway, we'll discuss all of this coming up next on Matt's Automotive Channel. All right, so first of all, how do we know if our car needs an oil change or not? Well, if it's been taken to one of those quick loop places or even a dealership, they often will put a sticker right up here in the window that indicates when the next service is due and the date and also the weight of oil that was used, like this one here. And however, this particular car, I do the oil changes myself, so I don't bother with the sticker. And this one is equipped with a computer that keeps track of when the oil changes are done, and all you need to do is just reset it after every oil change. But as you can see here, I'll go ahead and turn the vehicle into the run position, and you will note right here that it says oil change required. And before that oil change sign comes up, it does start counting down when it's probably around, I can't remember if it's either 5% or 10%, but it'll tell you what percent oil life is left. And then once it reaches 0, then we get this message here. All right, so now that we know that our car needs an oil change, let's go ahead and find out what type of oil that it requires, and also the oil filter that's needed for the job. So let's take a look at the owner's manual here. And you'll see here that it calls for a 5W50 weight fully synthetic oil. And that is right here. And for the oil filter, it looks like it calls for an FL820S, which is right here. That's what the oil filter looks like. And sometimes you can find this information even on the oil cap. This particular one does specify what weight oil to use. All right, so now that we know what the manufacturer calls for, should we ever deviate from that? No, not anymore. It used to be with the older cars using conventional oil. You could play around with that a little bit. But today, as modern cars, the oil doesn't only act just as a lubricant, it also acts as hydraulic fluid and is actually responsible for things like changing the variable valve timing, that sort of thing. So if you play around with the viscosity of the oil, you could alter that and perhaps your engine may not even run correctly. So very important to stay with the proper weight oil. So we're going to stick with the 5W50 here. You can go to different brands. You don't need to use this particular brand, and you can cross-reference and use something else. Also, this one does call for a fully synthetic oil. So should we ever go to a conventional oil? No. Not if it calls for a synthetic oil, never go backwards. These synthetic oils are more of an upgrade. They're more premium, they're more durable. And so if you go to a conventional, you're going to lose some protection there. Now, however, if your car calls for a conventional oil, it's fine to go synthetic or even a synthetic blend. That's perfectly fine. The synthetics cost a little more. Yeah, that's perfectly okay to do. It'll probably give you an extra layer of protection there. And perhaps even go a little further between oil changes. However, I don't recommend that. It's always best just to go with what the manufacturer says. You don't want to avoid any warranties or anything like that. So anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and get started here. All right, here's everything that you're going to need to do the oil change. In our particular case, our car calls for 6.5 quarts of oil. So I got 7 here. And you need some safety goggles, your oil filter, oil wrench, some gloves, a funnel, and a socket. In this case, I'm using an 18mm socket. And to get the car a little further off the ground, some ramps would be real handy. For some cars, you may not even need the ramp. If you have a four-wheel drive or an SUV of some sort, you may not even need those. In addition to those other things, we will also need a drain pan. I will be using the lift since I have it available, and it'll allow me to get a little bit better video of everything underneath the car. All right, I have the car about ready to lift up, and before we lift it up and start draining oil, I did run this thing just a few minutes just to warm the oil up a little bit. It will drain out easier if it's warm. So, and if the car's been driven for quite a while, it's a good idea to let it cool down, maybe 20 minutes to a half hour, so the oil's not too hot when you pull the drain plug. Another thing that helps is if you just loosen the cap a little bit, so air can come in here. It'll drain a little bit quicker and more complete. All right, I think we have everything pretty much ready. We got our oil pan ready right there. And I'll give you an idea of where the oil filter is and drain plug on this particular vehicle. Okay, so we crawl under here. Of course, there's the transmission. And right in front of that is the oil pan. And right here is the oil pan drain plug. I was mistaken. I think I said it was an 18 mm. This is a 16 mm. And the oil filter is right next to it here. You can see that last time I changed oil, I went ahead and dated it. It's always a good idea to do. You probably should put mileage on there as well, just in case the trip computer or something gets reset, or better yet, just log it in the maintenance schedule book and keep it in the glove box. So anyway, we're all set here, so let's go ahead and pull that drain plug. All right, so let's go ahead and get the drain pan right underneath. And let's loosen this up. And as you unscrew this, be sure to hold on to that real tight, otherwise you'll lose the nut there. So I just kind of push in as I twist it, and then when I get all the threads out, I just go ahead and remove it, just like so. Okay. It should just take a minute or so to completely empty this thing. All right, while that oil finishes draining there, let's go ahead and inspect the drain plug. These drain plugs, some of them have a little washer, a copper washer on it, sometimes a little rubber ring. This one has the little rubber ring, and I know it's recommended that you replace it every time you do an oil change. However, I usually get away with just keeping that one on there. If you look at it, if that rubber protrudes a little bit beyond the this flange here, you're probably good. It's still going to compress and seal. So until it gets totally flattened out or I notice a leak, I usually leave these alone. But it is probably a good idea to just go ahead and replace it. They're just a few cents at the auto parts store, so very cheap insurance. Okay, you can see that we're just down to a dribble now, so we can go ahead and replace this drain plug. And if you're looking for a torque spec, I believe it's about 20 pound-feet for these. So we'll screw that back in, and then the next thing we need to deal with is that oil filter. All right, now it's time to get the oil filter off. This is where you're going to need your oil filter wrench, at least to get it somewhat loose. So put this up here and just break it loose with this. There we go. Hopefully we can do it by hand now. And then once you get it somewhat loose, what I like to do is get a big Ziploc bag, because this is usually a pretty messy process. As you pull that oil filter off, usually oil goes everywhere. So I usually put a bag up around it and then twist it off, and then any spillage will go into the bag. As you'll see here in a moment, it's very dirty, very messy.
There we go. And you can see the oil coming down now. And hopefully it'll all get captured into the bag. At least that's the idea. There we go. And there comes the oil. So that's all getting captured in the bag instead of going all over the floor. Now let's give it a minute here. And there we go.
All right, then as you go, as you can see, using the bag trick, all that oil there would have either been on the floor, or I guess you could put the pan underneath, and I hope it doesn't drip all over, but this is just a much cleaner way to do it. All right, so now we're ready to get the oil filter ready to put back in. As you can see here, I went ahead and put the mileage on the car and the date, and then who did it. And it's also a good idea to put a little bit of oil into the filter first. That way, when on that initial startup, we don't have to worry about filling that up. Also, take a little bit of oil and then just put it around this rubber over in here. That way it'll go on much easier and come off much easier. And then also, before you put this filter on, make sure that the old one didn't stick to the oil filter housing. If it did, go ahead and pull it off, and then make sure you just got the one on here. Okay,
then we can go ahead and just wipe this this clean, make sure there's no debris or anything on it. And again, check to make sure that that oil ring is not on here. It looks all nice and clean. So now we can go ahead and just screw on the new oil filter. And this you just want to do hand tight. You don't want to take the oil wrench and put it down, otherwise you'll never get it off. So basically just go as tight as you can by hand, and that should be good enough. And there we go. Now we can go back up on top and start adding the new oil.
All right, we're ready to go ahead and add the new oil now. You want to use a funnel to put the oil back in. That way it'll prevent any spills. Also, be real certain that that whatever funnel or whatever you're using, make sure it's cleaned up really well before you put it here. You definitely don't want any dirt, debris getting into the motor. So just make sure you're always working with clean stuff. Okay. And now we can just go ahead and start adding the oil, and keep an eye on the dipstick when we get near around 6 quarts. And this also, it pours better if you do it from the top rather than from the bottom. That way it just goes out nice and smooth, and it doesn't pulsate and get oil everywhere. All right, just do this 6 or 7 more times, and we'll check the oil level, and we should be about done. All right, we have about 6 quarts in now, maybe a little less than that. There's still a little bit left in this one here. So anyway, time to start looking at the dipstick here, and you can see that it's probably 3/4 of the way up there. And so what we want to do next is go ahead and fire up the engine, circulate the oil. That'll definitely fill the oil filter all the way up. So there are some void spaces in there that will have to be filled up. And then we'll turn the engine off, and then we'll add more oil, and then fill the dipstick up to the fill mark. I just went ahead and checked the dipstick again, and you can see that our oil level is way back down below the min. So we'll continue adding until it gets up to the top mark. All right, and I just checked it for the last time here. Looks like we're back up to the full mark. So the only thing left to do now is reset our oil meter. All right, so we're back inside the car, so we'll just turn the ignition to the run position here. And we'll observe the gauge up here, and it still says oil change required. So down over here, I believe all we have to do is hit the setup button twice. Oil life set back to 100. So I think we're good. Okay, now the only thing left to do really is dispose of the oil responsibly. So I normally keep a couple of milk jugs around, and I'll go ahead and mark those as used oil. And then you can take those to your local auto parts store. Most of them will go ahead and recycle that for you for nothing. Or if you have the curbside recycling, you can leave it out by the curb. Just make sure that the containers are labeled used oil. So anyway, that pretty much concludes this video on how to do oil changes. I did mention earlier that there are some slight differences between cars, and usually those differences are just going to be the location of the oil filter. Sometimes they're mounted up higher or lower, and in Subaru's case, they're mounted right up on top of the motor and very easy to get to, and they're already inverted, so the oil's already drained out of them, which makes it quite a bit easier actually. So anyway, if you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell if you want to be reminded of videos going forward. The next video that I plan on is doing brakes on this car. The rotors are pretty much shot on it, and so we'll be replacing both the pads and the rotors. So anyway, till next time, I'll see you then. Bye-bye.